There are some plays, books, TV shows, movies that become cultural phenomenons. These forms of entertainment go beyond their expected reach of normality and enter a new, a rarely seen level of influence. The obvious example is Hamilton, this Broadway hit by the creative mind of Lin Manuel Miranda about the founder of our national bank, turned into modern rap musical, has blown the doors off Broadway and then off Broadway and then so many other forms of medium. But then again, I could also spend countless hours talking about one of my favorite directors and uber nerd Kevin Smith, who came out of the box swinging with his first movie that he had to make, by the way, by selling off his entire comic book collection just so he can get the money to make a good camera so he can make the film Clerks. Everything else after that has led to many more writing and acting and filming and so many other nerd related, film related roles. But that's not the most groundbreaking, small budget film of recent memory. That would be the 1999 award winning film, The Blair Witch Project. This very tiny budgeted film transformed Hollywood and gave them a needed reminder that not every movie had to be big budgeted, just computer generated. You can actually do things just by acting again. I know, right? Instead, this 82-minute film, with an initial budget, by the way, of somewhere around $40,000, raked in over $250 million, and then led to many more film and game adaptations and awards. Legendary and rarely seen level of influence. See, some projects are revolutionary for how they transcribe a character, like in Hamilton, or rejuvenate an industry, like in Clerks or Blair Witch Project. But then there's the makers who can breathe life into a dry product and make it gold. Peter Jackson is one of those people. I'm sorry, Sir Peter Jackson, because he's the legendary writer, director, and producer of the film adaptations of J.R.R. Tolkien's books, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. His perfect adaptations, and dare say a little improvements to the books, had led Jackson to take home many awards and recognitions, and in fact grossing over 6.5 billion. That's billion with a B. Billion. It's not should not surprise many of you to know that I do enjoy The Legend of the Middle Earth. Well, I'm not going to say I'm on the level of a Bob O'Coon or Stephen Colbert. No, not that big of a fan. But I do enjoy watching the movies, reading the books. I've even listened to some of the Audible books on for them too. It's enjoyable. Of the three main Lord of the Rings films, it's hard to choose which is my favorite, since each one invokes so many different memories, emotions, and I like all of them for different reasons. But of all the highlights and marvelous moments, there's a special place in my heart for the second of the film, The Two Towers. In this movie, and I'm not going to give you much, just a light spoiler, but it starts with Gandalf turning white, and if you watch the movies, you'll understand that. And the remainder of the Fellowship helping in finalizing their goal, stopping evil, saving Middle Earth. While skipping over a lot of them, and like I said, the weekend is upon us. Let's watch some of these. Our three heroes help the people of Rohan, who are going to be under siege swarmed by evil enemies and eventually killed if they don't do anything. But while they're in their stronghold, our heroes and the people of Rohan, all they had to do was hold out till morning, because Gandalf told them he'd be come with aid when daybreak starts. all they need to do is wait 12 hours. And that's not bad if you think about it. Unless, of course, you're under siege and neck deep and surrounded by evil. But the Lord of the Rings keeps coming back to this idea of timing, just like the book of Esther. When things are at their worst, when evil is waxing, we cannot stop trusting. We cannot stop trusting in our God, just like Esther and Mordecai. Today we're going to see the reactions to the genocide decree, rubber stamped by the king and the evil Haman, and keep coming back to the idea of we must wait for God's perfect time. Let's look at the opening dialogue of chapter 4 by looking at the first 3 verses 1, 2, and 3. When Mordecai learns all that he had done, Mordecai tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ash, and went into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command had his decree reached, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, lamenting. Many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. All right, so Mordecai is an emotional wreck, and rightly so. Chapter 3 took us on an adventure of Haman and Mordecai and their multiple encounters and the lack of worship, which we talked about in a few different videos. You can follow them, go back on my YouTube channel and look them up in the history. But these encounters and lack of worship towards Haman led to a state-funded future date of execution for all the Hebrews in the empire. And while we see in verse 1, Mordecai being so emotional, he ripped his clothing, crying and wearing sacks. So it's easy to kind of think of Mordecai just being some type of extra drama queen. Mordecai, you extra. But if you look at it with your biblical glasses on, this was kind of common and an expected reaction. Because as you saw, it happened throughout the world, not just Mordecai. But there's 3 things I want to focus on to help us understand. He tore his clothes, he put on ash and sackcloth, and crying. We're going to start with the clothing system. See, we look at this as a modern Americans, where our culture's based off of buy, take, throw away. Yeah, that's just sad. Let that hang over in your head for a second. Buy, take, throw away. We have many nice shirts. And if one gets ruined, we don't like one, we throw it away and get more. That's not the case here. Many people in the biblical period did not have many sets of clothing to choose from. So the act of literally ripping up his clothing magnifies what his grief so much more. He's choosing to throw away a good percentage of his clothing, his wardrobe. So this is an obvious sign of grief, of mourning. And it was common for among Jewish people and in Israel, but throughout the entire period, through even Persia had these type of acts of emotion. Then it says that Mordecai put on sackcloth and ash. Why? Well, these are both visible signs of someone in mourning. Sackcloth is a very rough, gritty material. Most of the time it was made out of goat hair or camel hair. Not exactly the best type of material, people. It was cheap. It was coarse. It was uncomfortable to wear. But by wearing these cheaply made, lacking of comfort, clothing, itchy, and then rolling around and covering yourself in ash, it symbolizes the complete desolation, identifying with the dead, or in this case, the future death of his people. If this were a modern time, and Mordecai wanted to show the extreme grief that he's going through, it's not going to be sackcloth and ash. No, it's probably going to wear a dark clothing. Maybe he's just going to live in his pajamas. He's not going to do his hair or fix himself up, makeup stuff. He's not meeting any of his basic needs like eating or taking care of himself, and just sit there crying. That's how a lot of us show extreme grief. But for Mordecai, crying was not here is that he mentioned was not just like a little tear rolling down his cheek. No, this was a loud, a bitter cry. Looking at the Hebrew, it helps us identify what this means, because it said that this cry was not just like cry, but was more of he hoisted a great summon, a decree for battle. This is the same type of loudness that somebody would do at the beginning of a war or declaring something to the entire town. Mordecai is at that level of emotion. This vocal shout, so everyone in the city could hear. He couldn't be ignored. This was not just him, his eyes watering. No, this is him reaching a new level of loudness, filled with bitterness, grief, regret. So it makes me automatically think this is not just some man boo-hooing on the streets, but this is an emotional man screaming his bitter emotions of the upcoming death sentence that his people are enduring. But the question does need to be mentioned, and I think we should take a moment to pause and ask it. Why was Mordecai showing these signs of grief in the first place? Would it be because he regrets his actions? Is he having that moment of doubt for refusing to bow down and pay homage to Haman, to worship Haman? I really don't think so, knowing that what we can tell of Mordecai so far, there's nothing that would support that idea. His actions were based on what the law said, what the Old Testament tells us. And here's the thing we need to understand, friends. He was more upset over the grief that his people were going through, that his people were coming to perish, not over his actions. I'm willing to give the man a doubt that if he's giving 10 chances, no, if he's given 100 chances to bow down and worship Haman, Mordecai would be over 100. So then these wails, these mourning that he's going through are not because he caused it, but over the future fate of his people. And by Mordecai showing such emotion, being in touch with his grief, he shows us that it's fine and normal to cry, to be emotional, to weep, as long as it's for the right reasons. It's not based on self-pity. It's not based on, well, what if I did this? No. Mordecai is so greatly upset over this empire-wide decree of a future execution. He expresses his emotions, and he's doing so in a healthy way, by crying, by grieving. It's the same thing for us. We need to do the same when we are moved to emotion like Mordecai is. While I wouldn't advise screaming at such a loud voice, but you do you. How would you handle somebody that you knew who was in such a state of grief or mourning like Mordecai is? Would your response be, buck up, champ, it's going to be okay? Shh, you're embarrassing me. You know what? Only losers cry. Or, I don't see this as something to get emotional about. You're just being too much. We laugh, but those are a lot of advice we give to people if you think back in your own memory. Instead, perhaps we could be empathetic, putting ourselves in that person's place to understand their emotions and what they're going through. We can show compassion, we can show kindness, and that's good, and that's what we need to do. But we'll truly never completely understand, unless we show empathy as well. Which is something that Esther does not do right away, because she does not show empathy. with the case, with Mordecai screaming, carrying on so much in the city, it doesn't take a lot for people to add 2 plus 2 together to find out. Esther will soon find out because Mordecai and her are related. Look at verses 5 and 6 of chapter 4. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might take his sackcloth off. But he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai and to learn what this was and why it was. So, was this the correct response from Esther to the situation? It says that she was deeply distressed over Mordecai showing his grief. Was this because she was embarrassed by him carrying on so? What distressed her? And how deep was her distress? Well, deep here in the Hebrew shows us that it could mean more forceful. So this deep, large, forceful amount of distress. And distress means to tremble, to shows. It has a lot of pregnancy terms, as in someone going through labor. So think of it this way: Esther is in deep distress, or she is in the middle of a powerful labor pains. To put your mindset of the type of distress she's going through. This is not the same type of distress as, oh no, I forgot to start the crock pot before I left for work this morning. Darn, we're going to have to throw out that meat. Oh no, my favorite coffee place is out of pumpkin spice. Oh, I got to settle with vanilla. No. This is a deep, a forceful, emotional response to Mordecai. But it makes me wonder that this is not because of something trivial, like, he's embarrassing her. Esther doesn't seem to be somebody, she seems wise enough to not be embarrassed by her Mordecai, her father figure, carrying on in such a way. It's probably because she thinks that this will allow everyone to notice that she's a Jew. Well, if Mordecai is reacting to this law, and he's grieving over this, and Mordecai and Esther are related, well, wait a minute, hey. So she sends clothing to him, and a command, which is not a command to stop acting like a fool, which is not, but more of a kind of calm yourself down so my secrets stay safe, put on some clothing so that we can come and talk. Because after all, no one's able to enter the palace dressed in such an unusual manner. But the scene is done through a very trusted servant, a eunuch who allows either side to communicate openly and share secrets that Esther trusts him not to share. Which then Mordecai relays the information about what had just happened through him in verses 6, 7, and 8 about, this is the law that happened. Haman's a jerk. Future execution. All Jews. Terrible. This decree of death would be terrible enough, but as we're learning, it's an opportunity to exercise our faith, to show trust in God completely, and wait for his perfect timing. Look at verses 9 through 11. And Hathach, the eunuch, went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. And Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's province know that if any man or woman goes inside the king's inner court without being called, there is but one law to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out his gold scepter, so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king for these 30 days. Esther is trying to help Mordecai understand what options she has as a queen, but also as a Jewish. Her options are not many. Seemingly, she's trying to walk the fine line of, do I prioritize being a royal or my heritage? Can she hide behind her crown and the rules of the kingdom? But if she does that, that does mean she's not trusting God. And a side note, between us, King Xerxes, I don't understand him. He has not seen his wife. The woman that he wanted so badly, that he did that beauty contest thing and sought her out and fell in love with her. He's not even seen her in a month. I just don't understand him. But that's not the point. The point is, if you were in Esther's stilettos, if you were in Esther's shoes, what would you do? Would you hide and hope that the death sentence passes over you? Would you barge into the king's room, knocking down the door, and risk execution, hoping he would extend his scepter to you? Or would you willingly go before the death squad to be with your people? Solidarity. Is there one response that's completely right? One that's completely wrong? I don't think so. But there is one path that Esther and us in these situations should walk, is that one of trust of faith. Look at verses 12. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief, deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to all the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather the Jews to be found in Susa. Hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young woman will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king. Though it is against the law. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Oh boy! At this time, for such a time as this, these verses help symbolize the attitude that Esther needs to have and that we need to have in these moments of trials. From extreme moments down to the everyday, if we are to keep silent. That is literally, if we are to be without sound, to be dumb, deaf. If we are to be silent in these situations and allow evil to spread, God will use somebody else. That's the attitude that Mordecai has. That's the attitude that we need to have. Because Mordecai had such great faith in his father that he knew that if Esther chose her privileged position, she would be able to help people in this situation for this decree of future death. Because after all, she was placed in the kingdom for such a time as this. Mordecai was so certain that God would provide through Esther. But even if Esther did not and wimped out, God would use somebody else. This is the same type of attitude that Daniel had in the Old Testament, that Joseph had, that Rakshak and Benny had, that so many people that God would provide either through them or through somebody else. But God will provide in the right time, in the perfect way. That is the type of faith we need to have in our God. One of absolution and certainty. Trusting not only that He's able to help, but He's able to do it in the perfect time. We're not any different. While I am the first to acknowledge, I am not the queen of a foreign country, nor am I the most beautiful maiden in the country. The principle is what I'm referring to as we're not any different. Each one of us has been chosen by God to serve Him, to share the free gift of salvation with all of mankind, with everyone we know, to live our lives in a worshipful manner that pleases God, that glorifies Him by what we say and what we do. Which means not hiding when it comes to standing up for what is right, not ignoring the evil that's going around us, the needy people, sharing the gospel, not fretting over why something hasn't happened yet or why it did happen and not the way we expected. Instead, let's be more like the level of faith of Mordecai, one of absolution in God, working through the perfect will and in His perfect time. Which means we need to share the gospel with everyone. We cannot ignore the hurting people that are around us. Hoping that some other Christian will come by. Let the pastor do the work. No. We need to do it. To share the gospel with everyone in our community. To reach the hurting. Both the physically hurting, emotionally hurting, the struggling. The people ravaged by tragedy they couldn't have stopped, like in Louisiana with the hurricane, the California forest fires, the hurricanes in the Caribbean, the evil in Afghanistan, so many more places. Be willing to risk a little to stand up do what is right for God. Will it always end up with a happy ending? No. But we cannot comprehend why God allows bad things to happen. After all, we're not God. But we still need to have the level of faith of God in Mordecai and Esther, to lean on the support of our family, our brothers and sisters in Christ. After all, the people in Azusa were fasting for 3 days, night and day. No food, just relying on God in that way, dedicating themselves to praying for Esther as she goes before the king in this dangerous act. It's not easy being a faithful Christian at times, standing up against sin and evil, having the faith to know that God will provide. God knows about all the struggles that we're going through. Some days I do feel like the men from the Lord of the Rings, stuck inside that stronghold with the enemy surrounding me, just trusting and waiting for daybreak in hopes that what I was told will happen. What I have faith in will happen in the right and perfect time. We can't get up. We can't give up. We can't hide. Just need faith. Be bold and willing to step out and to do what is necessary with God with us, to trust Him in His perfect will for our loving plan for our lives. See you next time, guys.